Hey, AP students, how you doing? Let's get right into our vocab words. I'm going to do something a little different here. I want to start with the fourth word right here, Reformation. So look at Reformation, and that's where we're actually going to start. We're actually going to start with Reformation and 95 theses. So our first word is Reformation that we'll be doing. Now, the Reformation is basically when there becomes a split in the Christian church. There becomes two groups. Catholics who stay with the main Christian body at that time, which was the Catholic Church, and a group that breaks away from the Catholic Church, called Protestants. And the word Protestant actually means protest, like they're protesting. So let's take this Reformation. Again, Reformation is a split when the Christian Church in Western Europe splits into, we have Protestants and Catholics. Now, this was the second split. There was already the Great Schism, which split the Catholic Church from the Orthodox. Now the Catholic Church will further split, and we'll have Catholics and Protestants. Now, the main person responsible for this split was a monk named Martin Luther. Martin Luther was a very devout, very good monk who got very angry at some practices the Catholic Church was doing. So he went to a door in Germany, in Wittenberg, and he nailed what's called the 95 Theses to the door. It was basically his 95 complaints of what the church was doing wrong. Now, this did not make the church and the Pope happy. So eventually what happens is the church pretty much says they're going to arrest him, and he very well could have been killed. And what he does is he's instead saved by a German prince at this time, and he's actually able to start a breakaway sect of the Christian church, which is called Lutherans, where Lutherans come from, and many other different groups will form out of this. Lutherans, Methodists, Baptists. These are people who we call Protestants today. They protested, like Martin Luther when he nailed his 95 Theses, and they became a different part of the church. Next word, 95 Thesis, which is our vocab word right underneath Reformation. The 95 Thesis was basically his 95 complaints about what the church was doing wrong at this time that he thought needed to be fixed to help the church. Now we're going to keep going with our next word, which is Indulgences right here, and we'll get back to these ones up here. But let's get into Indulgences. So Indulgences were actually one of his biggest complaints. Indulgences were something that you could buy, and buying these would exclude you or make it so you wouldn't have to pay penance. Now, in the Catholic Church, when you commit a sin, you're supposed to admit that you have done wrong, and then there's a penance that you are supposed to do for the sin. Indulgences said, you can just pay money, give a donation to the church, and that will cover this. Indulgences went so far that some people were selling them and basically saying you could buy indulgences for penance for dead relatives. So if they were in purgatory, a place between heaven and hell where they're waiting to see if they're going to get heaven and hell, you could buy this indulgence for a dead relative, and they could possibly go to heaven faster. Indulgences were actually used to help build St. Peter's Basilica, which exists in Rome today. So indulgences were being sold, and Martin Luther said, no, you cannot get penance from just buying something. This is one of his major complaints against the church, which led him to split away from the church in the Reformation. Let's go back up to the top of our list here under culture, and let's go to Huguenots next. So, Huguenots. Huguenots are French Protestants. That means they're not Catholic. They're kind of with Martin Luther. They are Protestants. They are people who have separated from the Catholic Church, but they live in France. And what happens in Europe after the Reformation, many different countries, kingdoms divide, and some will become more Protestant, some will become more Catholic. The Huguenots are groups of people who are Protestant but living in a Catholic country. So they become persecuted against in France by the Catholic majority that exists there. And many of them will end up leaving France, especially going to England. The Cluniac reforms, these came before the Reformation. And these were a series of changes within medieval monasticism of the Western Church, trying to bring the church back to its traditional values of monastic life, encouraging art and caring for the poor. Unfortunately, these won't be very successful, and partially because of these not being successful in other reforms, the Reformation will occur. Lollards were actually people led by John Wycliffe, and this was people in the church who believed that people should live a life of evangelical poverty, spreading the word of Jesus, trying to live like Jesus. And they were actually before the Reformation. So Lollards were followers of John Wycliffe. They were before the Reformation, and they tried to influence the church, try to live more like Jesus, and not be so concerned about worldly affairs, because at this time, the Catholic Church in Europe, as we'll read, is acting more like an empire and less like a church. And they want to turn this around to have the church be more about serving the people, like how Jesus wanted the church to be. They won't be that successful, and unfortunately this will lead to the Reformation happening. Predestined or predestination, this is the belief that basically our will or what's going to happen with us is already predestined. It's already going to happen, and there's nothing we can do about it. So this belief believes that basically it's already known who's going to be going to heaven and who's not, and who are God's people. Many Protestants will take on predestination, and they will believe that one of their jobs is to get the people who are predestined together to form their church to improve life here in their community and in the world. Puritans are a group of Protestants in the late 16th, 17th century, or 1800s, who basically will think that the Church of England, which is a Protestant church that broke away, but they think the Church of England didn't go far enough, and they think they need to simplify their worship, and they need to break away even more. And they are also Puritans. They want to purify the church, and they want to get away from any Catholic beliefs that are there. Many of these people in England will be persecuted against, and many of them will actually come to the United States of America, and when the United States of America starts as colonies under British rule in this era. Well, let's get to our next one, the Anglican Church. The Anglican Church is the Church of England, and it breaks away from the Catholic Church. The Church of England actually breaks away from the Catholic Church because this guy, King Henry VIII, wants to divorce his wife, and the Catholic Church won't let him. So his decision is that he will start his own church where he's the head of it as the King of England, and he's allowed to divorce his wife and separate from her. This will lead to the Church of England forming, which will make England a Protestant country, which will have a big effect in our era 4. The Counter-Reformation, also sometimes called the Catholic Reformation, is the Catholic response to the Reformation. This will be basically the Catholic Church's response. In some cases, it will bring persecution, as we will see the Inquisition, where people will go on trial for being against the church. And it will also bring some really good things. One example would be the Jesuits start at this time as groups who try to live more like a life like Jesus and try to more spread the word of the Catholic faith around the world. So we'll see some bad things and some good things from the Catholic Reformation, but it is basically the response of the Catholic Church against the Reformation, which is spreading throughout Europe, and eventually will divide Europe into Catholic and Protestant lands. Well, let's get into that word Inquisition. This is basically a long questioning and investigation done by the Catholic Church. It was to combat what was seen as heresy or being against the church. The Inquisition is to basically go against what the Reformation was happening at that time and try to bring people back into the Catholic Church and get rid of people who were being against the church. It did, unfortunately, lead to a lot of torture. There were people who were killed for this. And actually, it did have a damaging effect on much science and math that was going on at this time, as people had to directly follow the Bible and could not question the church. And this was a strong response to the Reformation that was happening in Europe. The Jesuits, I won't give too much information. This is the Society of Jesus, an order of the Catholic Church, started by St. Ignatius Loyola and St. Francis Xavier. And this was started to do missionary work and spread the good work of Jesus. The Jesuits will also become very, very, very strong in education and start schools and missions, many different places throughout the world, in India, in the Americas as well. And as you know, this looks familiar, it's because we are a Jesuit school. Okay? That's all I'm going to give you for that one. Let's move to our next word. The Council of Trent was basically a council of the Catholic Church, a way to organize against the Reformation that was occurring at this time. Out of the Council of Trent, we will see the Catholic Church have tried to have a more organized response to the Reformation that was happening. They're not really able to compromise with the Reformation, but we'll see an organized approach to it. The Jesuits come, and the Catholic Church basically is the embodiment or the total organization of the Catholic Church going against the Reformation that is spreading throughout Europe at this time. Another response to the Reformation by the Catholic Church in the Counter-Reformation was the Index of Prohibited Books. The Roman Catholic Church made a list of books that they saw as being dangerous to the morals of the Catholic Church. Amazingly, this kept going all the way up to 1966, which is not that long ago. But it was books that if you were Catholic, you were basically forbidden from reading. And when it came out, if you had one of these books, it could be quite dangerous. You could be arrested by the Catholic Church by having books that you were not supposed to have. Unfortunately, it's during a bad time in the Counter-Reformation of the Inquisition happening, people being questioned, and this does hold back science from advancing quite a bit in Europe at this time, as well as many scientific principles weren't accepted if they weren't in the Bible. All right, let's look at a social contract, switching gears a bit here. Social contract is basically an agreement by members of society that they will give up some of their freedoms that they can have to have state protection or protection from the government. Basically, it's the idea that there is, Rousseau is the person I would say most responsible for this, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, that this is the idea that basically people make an agreement with the government that, yeah, we'll give them some freedoms, but we expect protection, we expect to be able to have some jobs, we will expect to have this in exchange, we'll let you govern us. We'll give up some of our freedoms, you can be in charge of us, but we need to have certain things. We need to have safety and basically protection. So give up some freedom for protection is the idea of the social contract. Basically, the idea is that people say, you can be our government, but you need to protect us and also give us as much rights as we can possibly have. The Royal Academy of Science was basically started in what we see called the Scientific Revolution. This is where basically like Europe is putting more money into advancing scientific knowledge. Scientists like Isaac Newton are able to advance, and many ideas in Europe are able to advance in science, really waking Europe up at this time. And they're basically able to advance just like they did after the Renaissance and spread more knowledge. And this is really important and spreads in England and France and will allow Europe to make many advances in science and also basically, become a more advanced society in all ways. Scholasticism. This is basically a system of taking theology and religion and basically teaching it alongside of a lot of the Greek knowledge that came from Aristotle and other parts of the world, especially the Muslim world, and saying that, okay, we can take knowledge from the Bible, but we can also learn knowledge from science and other things in the world, and we can use these together to get a more complete knowledge, both spiritually and also academically. The Holy Roman Empire, different than the Roman Empire, it's in era 4, so we're looking after we're looking around the era at the end of era 3 and era 4. Starts around 1100s and will continue into era 4. The Holy Roman Empire was basically a large part of Europe. Germany was a huge part of it, parts of France. And this was an empire that was also under the power of the Catholic Church. There were many conflicts, actually, between the emperor of the Holy Roman Empire and the Pope. However, in much of era 3, in our post-classical era, it is a stronghold of Christianity, Catholicism. In this time period, it will become a place that becomes divided between Protestants and Catholics. Spanish Armada. Spanish Armada was a Spanish navy that was coming to take over England, and Spain had a much stronger military force. And they were coming to take over England when Elizabeth I was in power. However, a storm came and wiped out many of the ships, and the Spanish Armada was not successful. Because of this, England will become a major power and rise, and Spain will see its power decline as Era 4 goes on.